we can call this meeting to order. Are there any modifications or amendments to the agenda?
No.
Hearing any, moves us on to public forum. Shannon, I'm not sure if anyone emailed in for public forum for you.
I did not receive
All right.
it.
In that case, then, if there's anybody in the attendees that would like to put a question or comment out there, now is your time. Please raise your hand and we will acknowledge you. And I see one for Brian Core. Shannon, if you wouldn't mind promoting them, sorry.
So Brian, I think, is with NACOLE, right?
Oh.
Yeah, perfect.
Yes. He just found a back way in.
Okay.
Very, very crafty.
Well, after a year or so on Zoom, you have to have your ways. So
Very true. All right, then I'll give another couple seconds if anyone the attendees has any questions or comments. Not seeing any, so that concludes public forum. It's 5:35. We shall recess till 5:59, so we can start at 6 p.m. promptly. So we'll see everybody in about 24 minutes. Thank you.
Jibby, would you like us to just go ahead and jump in and get started? I can't hear you.
I'll try to go rescue him.
Okay, there he is.
Sorry about that. Zoom dropped. I could hear everybody, but nothing was there. So my apologies on that.
No worries.
All right. It is
This meeting is being recorded.
It is 6:01, and shall give the floor to Cami. Cami, it's yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you again for having us this evening for the fourth and last training in our series. Today, let me just go ahead and get my screen up here for you. Okay, and I can assume that everybody can see the screen okay? Great. So today, you all know very well who I am at this point, but today I have brought with me one of NACOLE's longtime members and one of our immediate past presidents, Brian Core. And so I wanted to just turn the floor over to him for a moment to introduce himself. Brian?
All right. Well, thank you so much, Cami. So as Cami said, my name is Brian Core. I live and work in Cambridge, Massachusetts, so not too far away. And so here in Cambridge, I am in charge of civilian oversight of the Cambridge Police Department. I also am the immediate past president of NACOLE. So I served 3 years as the elected president, 3 different terms. And now I am still on the board for a few more months as the past president. And I'll just say very quickly, I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan. I came out to Massachusetts after college back in the 80s. But I really come to this work from a city that when I was growing up had many challenges, some serious issues with police abuse, a program called Stress, which ended up killing 22 African-American men in less than 2 years as a way to try to make the community safe after the uprisings in 1967. And yet also saw a city that went through a lot, but the police department really did change. And so I bring that experience with me to the work of oversight. So I'm very glad to be here. Since I'm in Cambridge, hopefully I will get a chance to see all of you in person at some point as you continue to be engaged with NACOLE over the years, and just really glad to be part of helping you with your work for improving policing for the residents, visitors, and everyone who ever sets foot in Burlington. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Brian. And before we get into the meat of today's presentations, I just wanted to make sure there weren't any other questions, follow-up questions from Tuesday's session. Okay. Stephanie, you're still on mute.
Cami, I just want to say as a professor myself, when there's no response from the audience, it's worrisome, but I think we're still processing and everything was clear. So, it may be in the future that some questions come up, but it's not for lack of attentiveness or, ability to absorb what you presented. It was really very clear. And I think we're just going to have to integrate this in order to be able to, see if there are any questions. So just wanted to let you know that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stephanie. And as I've said before, the good news is that we're not going anywhere after today. We'll still be around and available for questions and discussions and whatever you need to continue to be successful in your work. So this is not the last time I'm available for follow-up for sure. So today, for our last session, we're going to talk a little bit about minimum training standards for oversight practitioners. And then we're probably going to spend the bulk of today talking about the identification and addressing of challenges and opportunities. So first, I'm going to move right into minimum training standards. So these training standards were developed as part of our work to identify effective practices in the field of civilian oversight. And it's based on the training that we're seeing across the country that seems to really give a base of information that's useful in the work, that allows people to feel like they have the knowledge to be able to carry out the mandates that they've been given. So with that in mind, I want to start a little bit about board and commission members. So training should happen very soon, if not immediately after appointment, and should not be considered one and done. This is just the beginning of training. The field is continuing to develop. I think everyone would agree that a lot of times until you get into the work, although you've got a good base of information, you never know what you don't know until you're faced with it. And so training should be an ongoing process. Also, it's important to remember that given diverse backgrounds, members of boards and commissions may have a very limited understanding of civilian oversight and its processes, law enforcement policy and procedures, criminal case processing, legal standards, reaching dispositions, and also doing that within the context of an administrative disciplinary system. So you're really, I mean, you have a group of people who are volunteering to do this work, and often there is a very wide range of people who actually know all of the information needed at the onset to do the work itself. Training should be provided by a broad array. So a combination of civilian oversight experts, community and government organizations, and law enforcement should be developed to meet the needs of all skill levels of your commission. Refresher courses are an absolute necessity, and advanced training opportunities should be provided yearly. So once you have your basic level of information, there's definitely those 300 level courses that can help you do some additional work and see things maybe in a different light. There's also much to be learned from organizations such as the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI as it's better known, mediation centers, homeless advocacy organizations, Urban League, also members of U.S. or city governments, as well as U.S. attorneys, prosecutors, public defenders, risk management specialists can also all be of benefit in this process. They all have information to contribute. In addition to providing members with a clear understanding of the authority and the mandate of the agency, trainers with knowledge and experience in civilian oversight of law enforcement should provide board and commissioners with an overview, much like you guys have had. So some of this you can just put the check mark next to, including overview of practices and principles of civilian oversight, discussion of stakeholder expectations, also information on the local oversight agency. It's important as commissioners come on that they know its history. The review of the enabling legislation or policy, what guides the work of the commission, the procedures, the scope of authority, so that everybody understands from the get-go what they are able to do and what their mandate is. Board and commission members also should be trained on public record and public meeting laws, confidentiality requirements, steps in the criminal justice process, something as simple as arrest, booking, arraignment, bail, hearings, trials, so that they understand the entire process. Also, state and local laws relating to law enforcement personnel actions, rights, and privacy is also something that's very important. Also, board and commission members must also have a broad understanding of the history, policies, procedures, and training practices of the law enforcement agency itself. A good example of, I'll just use my my hometown civilian oversight agency as one of the examples. So in addition to attending trainings that are specific to civilian oversight, the Indianapolis Police Civilian, or Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department's Civilian Police Complaint Board has to participate in 20 hours of training within the first 6 months of appointment to the board, and they work with law enforcement. That's specific to law enforcement, and they work with them to develop the curriculum. So, for instance, they might want to know traffic stop, everything about traffic stops and procedures relating to them, use of force policies. And then also the law enforcement agency can throw in some suggestions too about, this, we think this would be really important as well. So that way you have a collaboration to come up with information that all parties feel would be helpful. In addition to that 20 hours of training, they also have 16 hours of ride-alongs. And I believe we talked a little bit about ride-alongs on Tuesday. And ride-alongs are such an amazing way to bridge that gap of understanding with the commission and police officers. When I did, I'm fairly certain you've heard me say this before, but I'll just reiterate the fact that when I did ride-alongs, even though we only had 16 hours, I made sure that I did ride-alongs in all of the districts for an entire shift so that you see what it's like from beginning to end. I tried to make sure that they were at different points in the day so that I could see as much as possible. And it also gave me an opportunity to meet more law enforcement members and get their perspective. It's amazing the breadth of topics that get discussed when you're in a car together for an entire shift. And then all of the times you stop for the breaks, where once the law enforcement members of it who are out on the district that day or evening know that they have a commissioner or board member in a car, they tend to all come and have a moment to have a chat with you and let them know their feelings about civilian oversight, and also listen a little bit about what the oversight agency actually does. So it's a great opportunity to have those conversations. So next, I want to talk a little bit about training for staff. And so I realize that you don't have staff yet, but I think it's clear that staff would be beneficial. And so I think it's important to kind of talk about this for that moment when that does happen for you. So training should occur on a yearly basis for staff members. There is a lot of information that they can gain to do their job better. Continuing education, professional development opportunities should also be offered to ensure that an oversight agency staff has the information necessary to do the work effectively and efficiently. I should also note in here, because I'm not sure there's another place where I've kind of made space for this, that it is also really important, not only for the staff, but the board members or commissioners themselves, to work to network with other oversight practitioners in the country. Because issues that you're facing, 99% of the time, someone has already faced those same issues. And so one of the things I love about the oversight community is that no one feels the need to keep information to themselves. They are more than happy to provide any kind of information that they can to help you not have to reinvent the wheel. And so NACOLE, one of the things that we do is, you're trying to start, I know one of the things on my list for you are mediation programs, but even if you just called me out of the blue and said, or emailed me and said, we're thinking about mediation programs, who can I talk to that has some, can you put us in contact? And NACOLE will readily do that for you. We want to make sure everybody's talking to each other in the country so that you can get the best information you need continuously. And also, once you've formed those relationships with the other civilian oversight practitioners throughout the country, they tend to be a valuable resource going forward. It's also important to form a team of experts and oversight contacts. So this is what I've been talking about. So I think also they're nice to talk about internal as well as external issues that arise in the course of the work. How do you handle trying to get additional information on investigations? How if what methods have you used to help your commission work better together? Like, there's just a variety of information that you can get. I also, as you move forward, I think training should be a consideration in initial funding structures, so that you are sure that everybody continues to get the training that they need, and providing that base training that's so important to get the work done. As you continue, I think you should further prioritize education, so that you continue to know that your staff will be well trained, and their skills honed for the daily work. And I think it's also important for you and staff to be aware of developments in a field that's fairly specialized. So that kind of training will also help, and making sure that you have the budget to do it is very important. And then lastly, I wanted to emphasize law enforcement's role in the training. So when oversight is, when communities are looking to oversight or looking to establish oversight, one of the arguments that we hear is, how could a group of civilians know anything about the work that we do? Well, there are lots of professionals that are overseen by people outside of their professional. This is not the only instance that happens, but civilian oversight feels very strongly that those doing the work need to be prepared. And part of that is knowing as much as they can about law enforcement's policies, procedures, their role, their mission in the community, so that they can effectively do their job. Therefore, it's very important to help develop have law enforcement help develop the training, so it's not being done in a vacuum. It also is one more way that you can build some of those bridges and lines of communication that are so important to the overall results of the work. I should also note that I very firmly believe that oversight should also have a role in the training of law enforcement, in that law enforcement should have a moment. Now, the length of moment, I'm sure that law enforcement might disagree with me on how much training, but law enforcement needs to be trained on civilian oversight, that they have a very clear understanding of your role, the mandate, what to expect, so that there aren't all of these misperceptions about what civilian oversight is that get spread within law enforcement agencies. I think also not only talking about civilian oversight in general, but very much emphasizing the benefits of civilian oversight to law enforcement is also a very important part of that training. So that can't be understated. So with that, I want to stop and see if anybody has any questions about the training before we move on.
I don't, so here's my question. So this is really helpful, and I think maybe at some point more specifics about sequentially what kinds of trainings would be useful for us given where we're at right now. I mean, if I just could reiterate something that you said, we have 2 new members who are joining the commission. It sounds like we should organize some kind of initiation for them with documents, and they are participating, by the way, in these trainings. They have been in the audience here, so they've had the benefit of that. But it sounds like we also need a more kind of defined introduction to the work of the commission. And
yes,
so, yeah,
agreed.
And so maybe at some point we could just have some discussion with you about, given how, as much as you know about us, and I know Brian has been in touch with folks in Burlington, as I recall, with Kyle Dodson, and I think you and I were on a phone call. Maybe right. Give us some advice about what you think would be sequentially useful for us to do next.
Yes, we can do that. I think kind of that development of a onboarding process for them, and those that come after. is great, because then there's also, it adds that consistency. So yes, we can absolutely have those conversations.
Great, thanks.
Any additional questions? Okay, well, then I will turn things over to Brian for the next portion of our presentation tonight.
Well, thank you, Cami. And again, I'm really just very glad to be here. Glad to be part of this effort to work with you here. And as Stephanie said, you know, I had a number of conversations with Kyle Dotson when he was doing his work within the police department, and gave me some insight into Burlington. I mean, I've also, it's been a while with the pandemic and everything, but I've had a number of friends over the years who are from Burlington and spent time there, but it's been a while. So I look forward to coming back up. But having said that, you know, I said a little bit about who I am. And as we go into this conversation about challenges and opportunities, we're going to be doing some work that is really hopefully interactive. I am not here to lecture about a whole bunch of different ideas to you, as important as that is for parts of the training. But this is really an opportunity to hear from you and to help you think about what challenges and opportunities you, your community face, and how you can address those, how you can really, through your work, ensure that the work of the police department and, of course, your own work is as good as it can be, and also that the community is getting its needs met, that the community is getting the kind of policing that it needs and deserves and wants. But to start this, I want to just kind of ground this a little bit in who's here. So I'm going to ask the commissioners, if you wouldn't mind, to introduce yourselves, and I can always remind you, but I would just ask if you're willing to share, you know, your name, obviously, but also why you're on the police commission. You know, not a full long thing, but just basic, you know, in a few sentences or a paragraph or something. And then, in a similar way, what life experiences do you bring to this work that you see as relevant? You know, what lived experience, what things have you seen or lived through, or your family history, or whatever, that informs the work that you do as a member of the police commission. So again, who you are, why you're on the commission, and what do you bring to this work? So anyone can start, and I know I guess we can't see each other, so it looks like Jabulani has unmuted.
Yeah, I'll be happy to start. My name is Jabulani Gamash. I go by Jabu normally. I grew up here in Burlington, longtime resident, and I joined the commission in response to what happened. There was an incident that happened involving some police and some people of color in our town, and I joined in response to what happened to them. One of them is a close friend and a teammate of mine, has been for years, and I felt the need to see how this works and wanted to hopefully affect change so it wouldn't happen again. And I guess for my lived experience part, I've been a bartender right in the center of downtown Burlington for the last 10 years. And like, you know, I usually work, you know, Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights from, you know, 5 in the afternoon till 3, 4 in the morning. So I've seen a lot. I can't say I've seen it all, but I've seen a lot downtown. So I feel that kind of helps me with this, because I see police interactions. I've seen it all downtown. So yeah.
All right, great. Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing all that. And Jabu, that's fine.
Yep. Jabu, okay.
Jabu. I try to say people's names properly. So
quite all right. If we're in Eswatini, they'd say it differently. So it's quite all right.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Who'd like to go next?
I can go next. My name is Mila Grant, and I joined actually prior to the commission, I applied and was accepted for a committee to review policing policies, and very similar reasons to what Jabu reported. Right now, the city of Burlington actually has 3 pending lawsuits related to use of force, which is something I think about a lot. And one of those incidents just really it just said to me that something is really broken here, and that our community just can't continue in this way. So I wanted to be involved and look at policies. That committee ended up helping to, initiate and push through new use of force policies, but there was still a lot of work to be done, I felt. And so when a position became available on the police commission, I applied for it. In terms of lived experiences, I have always felt that I've created a safe space for myself here in Burlington. I'm born and raised in New York City. That not to say that I haven't, faced discrimination. I don't think there is a black person in Vermont who can't tell stories of what happened. But I just suddenly realized that maybe I'm not as safe as I thought I was. And I also concerned for some relatives of mine, like, young men who aren't as safe as I would like them to be, especially from people who should be protecting them. And then growing up in New York under, just profiling that terrorized Black and brown people on a routine basis every single day. You didn't know anyone whose relatives, friends, uncles, sons, husbands, father, everybody had a story, and it was just relentless. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with the concerns and what motivates me. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for sharing all that, Milo. Okay. So who would like to go next?
I can go next. Hi, Brian. I'm Shireen Hart. So I joined 5 years ago when the commission was heavily focused on the law enforcement's response to folks in mental health crisis. There had been a recent death in response to a crisis, and so that was what prompted me to join. And so in terms of experience, it's that I work with a lot of mental health agencies and hospitals where we intersect quite a bit with law enforcement. So a lot of the work I'm doing is advising, obviously not the majority of my work, but certainly it's not uncommon where the issue of law enforcement in response to mental health crises is an issue. So that's what brought me here.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Hi, Brian. So my background is as an economics professor, and I've been involved with Burlington Police Department, I think since 2012, analyzing their traffic stop data. They were one of the first cities in the state to do that. And I've continued to do it. And I continue to find in our analyses of the data that racial disparities not only exist, but in a number of cases have widened in some areas in Burlington. And so part of my motivation was really seeing what is going on and seeing if there was a way that I could possibly contribute to change at a more local level rather than doing kind of statewide analyses. And I think the other issue for me is, in addition to Jabu and Milo's point about recent incidents and concern about family and friends of color, also, I have done some training in social work and in counseling, and the research on trauma-informed practices seems to me so important, and it does not seem yet to have disseminated to our schools, but also the police agencies. And I just wanted to bring a different perspective, and one that understands where people are coming from rather than just putting people in a box. And so hopefully that perspective, I could bring to the commission.
Thank you. I appreciate that too. So I think we have Zoraya left. I'm saying it properly.
Hi, I'm Zoraya Hightower, but I'm not on the police commission. I'm a city councilor for Burlington.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. But since you're here, I would love for you to share along those same lines. So Zoraya, you said? And
Zoraya.
Zoraya. Okay. I try. I'm not very good. But Zoraya, and so you're on the city council. And would you mind sharing what life experience, what lived experiences you bring to that work?
Yes. So I grew up in rural Oklahoma and moved to Vermont in 2016 after graduate school. And I did care about public safety. And part of the reason also that I ran for city council was we just had a string of incidences in our local politics that were like police scandal related. But I've, been pulled over and had a gun pulled on me before when I was, 19, 20 years old. So that's definitely something that I bring to my public safety work.
Thank you. I really appreciate all of you sharing. And just to be clear, my understanding is Shannon is staffing. She's not part of the commission.
Correct.
Okay, so not to disregard somebody, but we're going to focus here on the commission. And of course, as an elected official, we're very glad that you're part of this training as well. It's really important to have different parts of government and community getting this information and engaged in this. So I've done this long intro, and I really appreciate that. So if Cam, if you wouldn't mind moving us to the next slide. So when we do these trainings, one of the things that is, I would say, always important to think about is, how we got here. So I'm talking to people who live in Burlington, Vermont. I don't. I've visited and all that. But the concept of Sankofa is one that comes from the Akan people in Ghana, in West Africa. And the image there is a bird, and it's a stylized bird facing forward, feet facing forward, head looking backwards, and it's carrying a precious egg, which both represents the future, but it's also something that we can't see. There's something in that egg, and we don't know what it will eventually be. And so this is this idea that we have to remember the past, we have to know where we've come from, to know who we are in the present, and to be able to understand where we're going and where we need to go, to do reflection, to be able to continually think about what it is that we must be doing. So NACOLE has used this concept of Sankofa since its founding. So this is something that I like to start this conversation with. And so I'm just going to share, I won't call it research because, I went to a few websites, did some looking at Vermont history, and there's things I know already. But, Vermont, like all of North America, belonged to the people who lived here. People came from Europe, settlers, colonialists, conquerors, and Vermont has as a state, this proud history of being the Vermont Republic and being formed in 1777. We know there's a much more complicated history about New Hampshire, New York, and land and property and competing grants. And we also know that there were Black people, there were people of African descent in Vermont. There's some questions about exactly how many, and were they enslaved or were they free? It seems most likely that they were free in the southern part of the state. They were not enslaved by the time Vermont became part of the United States. But if you look at the history of Black Americans in Burlington in the 1800s, like many cities around New England, there was a relatively small Black community. They had to deal with a lot of discrimination, as Black people did everywhere. So they may not have been in the South. They may not have been dealing with Jim Crow, but that history is still there. And, there are one person that I found in my very quick reading was someone named Jeffrey Brace, who was a farmer. He fought in the Revolutionary War, and he actually wrote a memoir to preserve some of his life history. But he was actually born in West Africa. And he was brought to Barbados first, and then he eventually ended up in Connecticut and made his way to Vermont, where he created a life for himself. But these sort of anecdotal things are part of history that I personally think are important because they're generally not known. I would imagine that from what I know and the way people talk in Massachusetts, that, it's Vermont, it's almost completely white. There's a couple hundred Black people scattered around the state, maybe a few other minorities, but it's totally white. It's rural, and it's like those TV shows that we used to watch in the 80s. And we know that it's much more complicated. We know that There are huge amounts of poverty, rural poverty, urban poverty, even as Vermont is overall a great place to live and a wonderful state, and more focused on equality and diversity inclusion than many parts of the country. But it's not sufficient. We know that there's much more. And the fact that Vermont was the first state in the country to abolish slavery is vitally important, but it also points to the fact that abolishing slavery was not enough to create equality. So I say all this just to share from my little perspective, but I actually want to now kind of hear from all of you. So the questions you see: why was this board established? What does Burlington want? And what will your legacy be? So in the intros, people did say something about like why they personally joined the police commission. But I guess I would just ask any or all of you to share from your point of view, why is there a police commission? And and why is it engaged in the work it's engaged in now? Why are we here from NACOLE doing this training at this point in the life of the police commission? So I open it up to you.
I don't mind starting this time around.
Great.
My understanding is that the commission mode of government in Burlington was established under Bernie Sanders, who wanted to democratize community participation. I don't know much more than that about the origins of the police commission here. But I will talk about where we are and where what I hope our legacy is. I think that what we have learned, and many of us knew, is that what is public safety for some is not for others, and that some people are over surveilled and under protected. And I think, we are a community that really believes in equity in theory. And I think the goal is to enshrine that also in our public safety system, that we all enjoy public safety, that we are treated the same way for behaviors that others of a different race or gender identity possess. I think there's a strong feeling that the sort of white dominant community has dominated the discourse around public safety, and we haven't heard those voices who have been harmed and don't feel safe in this community, and in particular don't feel safe with the police. And I also think that we're also at the juncture of a Brian Stevenson moment, in which we understand that if somebody has done something bad, it does not mean they're an evil person, but that things have happened to them, and that we have to evolve along with brain science and a lot that we have learned about the human brain and the effects of trauma and so forth. And it's our job to help modernize our institutions. And the school district is one, of course, but policing is another.
Thank you. So who else would like to share? Why do you think, or think the board was established? What does your community want? And what will your legacy be for this work?
I can't speak to why the board was established, but I have heard anecdotally from a fair amount of people that right around the turn of the millennium, like around 2000, 2001 or so, the commission, the police commission had a lot more power. And then, like I said, I was in high school at this time, so I wasn't paying attention to local news. But I believe at that point in time, the commission and other commissions around Burlington had some of their power taken back and put back to the mayor. So yeah, I can't really speak to why I was established, and I can't really add much to what more Burlington wants. I think Stephanie pretty much hit that one on the head pretty well, and I would hope the legacy of the police commission is, because right now we don't have a lot of authority. Our mandate is very vague, and it almost seems like that was kind of intentional. But like I said, I can't speak for what was happened in the past. But I certainly hope that the legacy of the commission moving forward is that it will, like, it can provide oversight that is wanted in our community, and that people actually look to us as a body with like respectable authority, not just kind of what's the term I'm looking for here?
Sort of like a paper tagger or something, or
exactly, you know, because yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I just want to follow up on what both Stephanie and Jabu said. For me, a legacy for us would be if there were 7 different people sitting here, but the work we did helped inform them and make their job easier and maintained the improvements that we're hoping to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Great.
I guess I would add, I don't know as much about the history. I could say that my general observations before joining were that there wasn't a lot that the commission could do. Even some of the things that are written down, like, for example, that supposedly we would have a say in discipline. The reality of that situation is that that's not true. And when we look about what actually happens, I think that I know a lot of my motivations come from a main thing I think the people of Burlington want, which is accountability. Accountability and transparency has really been lacking. So I believe that one of our main purposes is really to try to improve that and put processes in place that will establish guidelines and support guidelines. But I know those are the top 2 things that people want. And I would hope that the legacy would be that we're able to do that, to really continue on to this work. I mean, we've certainly learned so much during these sessions. I was listening to the one that I had missed when I was on vacation last weekend. It was just really amazing stuff and giving us ideas of what to ask for, because it's not offered up by the department, giving us ideas of how maybe we could work better with the department, because that is definitely an issue. But I think the community and what our legacy should be is just having that idea where, you know, everyone can look at the public safety system and know that they're being treated in a fair and equitable way by a system that they can rely on when needed, and also know that they would have respect, and then can also respect the officers that serve in the department, you know, because there's definitely issues of respect and trust within the department and outside of the department as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So this is really, really great. And again, as someone who's here for the first time, I see a couple. There's someone else who's just joined. I don't know if that's someone who is a member of the commission or member of the council or visiting. But I see Karen Paul.
Right. I might just suggest that one of the people who is going to be a new commissioner is in the audience, Susie Comerford, and maybe she wants to say something as well. Maybe not. I'm not sure.
Let's see. It looks like she's being brought in through the magic of Zoom. So, Susan, you are able to speak, I think, if you would like to address those same issues.
I've been having trouble connecting, so I can't really speak to them at the moment. I'm now connected.
Okay. Well, then I can just say one of the questions which I will ask you is, I ask everyone to just address in their own way. What do you feel like Burlington wants in terms of, this police commission, and what do you hope your legacy will be? I know you're not on it yet, but
well, my sense of what the community is asking for is more accountability and more independence of the police commission itself. And I would hope, and next to that is an honoring of all the people that are involved in the process, including the police. But I really believe that it's important. I've been listening very carefully to the community, and they're clearly asking for more independence, largely. and that this commission might be able to do investigations in the way they need to be done, the way we've been taught. I've been following through on these police trainings, and it's very clear to me from what I've been learning how important it is to have independence. And so that would be one thing I'm hearing in the community that I've also heard through this training. And I guess, I haven't thought much about the legacy question, but what I would say is that that I was a good listener to the community, and that I did my fair share of work on the commission, and that we were visionary as a whole group in terms of meeting the needs of the community, with a special emphasis on equity.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate that. And it looks like Kevin has also been given the ability to share. So those, again, same questions to the extent why do you think this board was established? What does the community want? And what will your legacy be as the police commission? So I don't see Kevin unmuting. All right, well, let's continue on. And if Kevin is able to speak or wants to speak, we will give that opportunity. So let's move on to the next slide. And this is where we're going to do this little exercise about challenges and opportunities. So it's really, again, I mean, some of the things that you've already brought up have addressed some of these ideas, but there's not like a big template that I have. But although we do have some ideas for common challenges that communities face. So, but before we throw up our whole list, we would really like to ask you, what are the challenges that you see in accomplishing all those things you talked about, in being able to have more authority and being able to help the community, all parts of the community, feel that they can trust the police and public safety is in their interest and is keeping them safe, and all of those other things. The challenges in general you face, what are they? So just throw things out. You don't have to give a whole list or a big explanation, but just what are the challenges that you see from where you sit and what you know for the work of the police commission?
I think one of the main ones right now is access to information.
Okay, access to information. What else is there? This looks like Stephanie. Did you?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go back to something that others have said about us having vague authority. I actually think we have the authority to do a lot, but we ourselves have to change our practices, and this training is one of the ways for us to step forward. So I think we have a lot of work to do to really carefully define what our boundaries are, what our roles are, and align our practices with those goals, right? And they're very simple things. Some of them are very simple. For example, securing legal counsel for ourselves so that we are better able to understand complaints and investigations. I would say another challenge is we just got a data report that shows pretty wide racial disparities in a number of areas. And I still am not clear as a commissioner. We've made attempts to address this with the police department, but what is the scope of policies that we can propose? What are the mechanisms that we use to be convincing or to leverage change? I think for me, it feels very stuck right now that there's a desire for change in the community. The commission is seeing its role as being more substantive, but the police department, with no disrespect whatsoever, but they have been used to a system that is very different, and I'm not sure how much our input is appreciated at this point, and that navigating that relationship for me, seems very difficult.
So thank you. So not to try to sum up everything, but I'm hearing sort of two big themes there. One is almost the tools to do the work, or even how to use the tools that you already have, yep. And then how to effectively, have an effective, respectful working relationship with the police department. So it's almost a parallel to that sense of trust. So great. Those are not uncommon and important challenges. So, all right. What other challenges do you face in, again, in your work as a commission or even in the community around policing?
I think the items that were just mentioned are really, I just want to reiterate them because they are really affecting how we move forward. Like lack of cooperation and in terms of looking at the data and looking at, glaring data points that say if you put particular officers working a particular shift in a particular area of the city at a particular time of day, you dramatically increase the likelihood of them having use of force with racial disparities. What is your strategic plan? And just to be really ignored and have nothing, have no response to it, and to just keep asking over and over again, but not to have any response. How do we get past that, that type of resistance, right? Because it's really changing the culture. The culture is a huge, huge issue. Additional training for them. I have been trying to get information specifically on bias training. What does that training actually include? Does it include, a historical context? Because there are things that sometimes get said that are just really insensitive. And then education. I mean, as I said before, these trainings have been so helpful, but that, I do a lot of reading on my own to really see what else is happening, and then also to go through and take a look at the information and what exactly is in place. Because sometimes you come across things that are actually in place. So if it's in place, then why can't we? Why can't it be effective? So, for example, you can read certain things and it would seem that we should be able to have access to information, yet we could be denied that access to information. And then we're just kind of stuck, so what can we do about it? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I think I saw Shireen's hand as well.
Thanks. I was just going to add that you had mentioned community, and I do think that will be a challenge for us, is getting the trust and the backing of the community.
Can you say a little bit more? Because I can imagine, but it's, every community is different.
Yeah, I think that I don't want to speak for the community as a they, but I will say that we're perceived as being an extension of the police department. And I can see now after the training why there is that perception. I could see that all along, but I think there are easy fixes to help reinforce that is not our role and we aren't. I mean, we learn just basic things, not meeting, we shouldn't be meeting at the police department. We should have portions of our meetings where we are meeting alone in an executive session to deliberate on some of the things we have. So I think it's a challenge, and it's the community, that will be a struggle for them possibly. And again, I hate speaking for the community, but I think there will be those who will have a hard time placing their trust in us.
Could I add to that? And so I think that one of our challenges then is how do we communicate with the community about the changes that we are making to help them understand, to help them understand our kind of journey in becoming more independent. I think that's a question. I don't know that in the past that the commission has independently communicated with the community or the media or whatever else. And I think we realize we have to take that on And so I think a challenge is, how do we do that? Especially we don't have a staff person yet.
Great. So before we sort of share the challenges that we commonly see, or anything else, any challenge you want to mention? It's fine if you don't. I just want to give people one more chance if there's something that someone else said that reminded them. So it looks like Shireen.
I think there are some challenges in the form of the collective bargaining agreement that there might be changes, but that's a really, that's not an easy fix. But I think that has presented difficulties for the commission to accomplish what it has in the last year identified as necessary or important.
Okay, now that makes sense. It totally makes sense. So, Gabby, should we do the reveal of the, which sounds overly exciting. It's not that exciting. But, so I'll just kind of run through these quickly. These are some of the challenges that we're seeing around the country, especially in the time we're in, with the racial reckoning, the political situation, pandemic. I mean, all of these things have created a lot of energy around challenges. So there are very high expectations. And I'm sort of getting that sense from all of you. It's sort of the theme that the community really wants change, and they want your entity to be able to drive that change and make those changes. So it sounds like there are high expectations. One thing that we see a lot in communities, especially in police departments, but also in oversight agencies, sometimes is fear of change. That can be fear of changing how you do things. That can be fear of, opening up your processes to let other people in. There's a lot that goes into that, but there's a lot of fear of change, and there can be fear of change in the community from different sectors. I mean, I'm hearing, and I think appropriately so, a lot about people who don't feel safe, but I'm certain in a city of 40,000 plus people, there will be people who think that it's great and the police are awesome and don't touch it. So there will be fear of change in many different ways that are within the community. The role of community trauma. Now, again, just picking up from what people said in a couple of stories and knowing this is the nature of things, our whole society, there have been some incidents that have traumatized at least certain parts of the city of Burlington, and that have driven people to get involved in this work, have made people become more aware of problems, have had people really looking to figure out what's going on in the city that is known across the country for being very progressive and forward-looking, and yet is still dealing with issues of racial disparities, of use of force, lawsuits against the police department. So those things can create a level of trauma that builds upon whatever trauma people have brought down through the generations, the trauma that people may have experienced in other parts of their lives. And that's a really big thing. And I know, Stephanie, you mentioned this a couple of times, and Cammie can tell you that this is one of the things I care about most in this work is the role of trauma, the complex nature of trauma and how it affects individuals, communities, police officers, the police culture, and the interplay among those things. So I would love to talk more about that at some point. So again, I'm not going very fast. Skepticism from law enforcement, y'all talked about that. A lack of understanding of oversight and its role. Now, this is something that I didn't really hear, but comes up a lot because people will have this expectation. Well, I'll put it this way, to use and I'm going to say something about George Floyd, so I just want to kind of warn you. But I've heard many, many people say that, well, civilian oversight doesn't work because Minneapolis had civilian oversight and George Floyd is dead. And so if people think you have to set expectations of what oversight can actually do and doesn't do, and how much change can be made and how much things are systemic versus individual and all of that. So there can be challenges around that. Impartiality is often a challenge in this work because people often will come because there's something that drove them to want to make a difference about policing and law enforcement, make it more fair and more just. And in looking at specific issues and cases, you still have to be impartial. And that's part of having legitimacy with, in quotes, both sides, but with all aspects. You have to have legitimacy with the law enforcement agency for them to cooperate and take you seriously, because as it sounds like you're already experiencing, if it feels like there's not cooperation, it's really hard to get the work done, no matter what power you're given. There has to still be that relationship. And you have to have legitimacy with various parts of the community, different ethnic groups, different interest groups, different parts of town, business community, and nobody is not, no one entity will have legitimacy with every single human being in every single group. But broadly, you want to build legitimacy with as many people and entities as you can. You've talked a lot about the need for training, and we're doing training. I haven't heard as much tonight, this idea of change can't wait. But we hear that in a lot of communities, that we have this moment, and if we don't do it right now, we're going to lose it. Nothing will ever happen. And my kind of line is that change can't wait, and sustainable change takes time. It takes patience. And it's hard to tell people to be patient when we see what's happening around the world. We see what's happening in our country. We see what's happening in our communities. And yet, for this work to be sustainable, it can't be too rushed. You have to move with all deliberate speed, but you also have to be thoughtful and patient. Attempting to meet all the demands. What to say about this? I guess basically this comes up a lot. And for oversight boards, you will get criticism. One of the things about civilian oversight is if we're doing our job well, often everybody's at least a little bit upset with you. Nobody's totally happy. Complainants aren't happy. Police officers aren't happy. Activists aren't happy. Elected officials aren't happy. And they may not be furious, but they're probably going to feel like you're not doing enough of this. You're too attached to that. You're not listening enough to us. You're not doing enough to make those people do something. So a challenge can really be realizing you can't be everything to all people, and you start attempting to do all those things and you're not able to do it. And then I'd say the last thing on the list, that some stakeholders think others cannot be engaged. I don't know if that's an issue in your community, but it is in most communities. There will be people who just feel like, why are you even trying to talk to the police? There's no point. And other people say, oh, those people, they come to public comment every week. Don't listen to them. We know what they're going to say, and everything in between. So it's important that the commission, to the extent that it can, is a place where if all those people aren't actually coming together and hearing each other, you are able to hear all of those voices and hear and listen to and validate all of those stakeholders, and help to be that kind of holds that place in the community with your broader, deeper responsibility around policing and law enforcement and community safety in Burlington. So that was a lot. I talked more than I usually do. I don't know why. So, but I guess before we move on to the next thing, which is going to be opportunities, anything else that brought up, or anything else people want to share? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody. So Cami, let's move on to opportunities. So I heard a little bit, again, as we were talking before, people were sharing, there's an opportunity for getting more training. There's an opportunity to communicate better. But, just what are some of the opportunities that you see in this police commission and the work that you have to do? And I'm happy to call on people.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, Jabu, would you like to start? Do you mind?
Actually, I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question?
Oh, not at all. That's why I warn people I call on you. So no, just really opportunities. What are the opportunities that you see? And they can be, again, specific opportunities about the work. It could be opportunities about the moment we're in as a society, and that maybe that's an opportunity. Just whatever opportunities you see for the work.
I do see this as a moment, and at the moment started, I want to say a year and a half ago for a lot of us, but this is a moment that we can make change and that we can build something that kind of like lasts. And luckily, the commissioners we have right now on the commission are working towards that, and I feel fairly confident that we will be able to set something up that has legs and that can sustain on once we're all done. Because I don't see us right now kind of being able to do some of the really, really big things that people want, but I do kind of see us now as putting the pieces in place for the next commissioners to really be able to run with this.
Okay, so the more you can make change that lasts, and sort of setting up the people who come after you for success and the ability to do the work. That's great. Okay, what else?
I'll jump in. I think one of the opportunities is that for a variety of reasons, partly because the state law changed a few years ago, but for other reasons as well, we actually have not an insignificant amount of data. So I think that we're able to make evidence-based assessments of what's going on in the police department, and many towns don't have that. So I think that's been can be really useful for us. And I just want to reiterate what Jabu said about the moment that we're in, and that is that there have been disparate voices for change. People of color have talked about incidents for years that have happened, but there's never been a critical mass. And we now are at a moment where there's a critical mass, not just amongst the community of color, but also the white community that has really heard the experiences of the community of color. And so that really is, I would say, the momentum behind the changes that we're able to make. So I also see the city administration being on board with this. So I think political leaders in the city, including the 2 city councilors that are here now, for example, is testimony to how much interest there is in addressing these issues. So it's both a really tense time and feels a little bit polarized, but at the same time, I think there is a lot of sense that we are, this is a moment for change, and we actually have a consultancy working on what is the community's vision around public safety. So again, I think we have some evidence that will support the things that we're trying to do. And so, yeah, I think in many ways it's an exciting time.
Great, thank you. Other opportunities of whatever sort.
There are so many. They really, really are. When I take a look at where we're starting from, one of the things that I have really been hammering away at is just better engagement, right? We need really just better community engagement. And we need everyone, no matter where they land and how they feel about what we currently have, we have certain rhetoric that's just been a huge concern to me. And I think it just really interferes with making progress. And I think we need to change the way that we speak to each other sometimes. We need to talk in terms of everyone wants a public safety system that they can trust and rely on, and that they know will treat them equitably. Like, who can't get behind that, right? Well, there probably are a couple of people who can't, but by and large, most people can get behind a statement like that. So I think we have to, look at our politicians, look at people who represent the community, and just really say that, language matters, words matters, and that also this is an issue that cannot be ignored anymore. There's been committees to look at things before, and I think there's a much bigger sense of urgency, not just because what happened to George Floyd, but what happened within our own community, just stuff that is not okay. And how much further does it have to go? We're just at that point, and really trying to educate people and help them to understand that we're just at that point. We cannot go further than this. So I think the sky's the limit right now from where we're starting. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mila. I think Shireen, did you want to share?
Yeah, this is more micro.
That's fine.
I think we have an opportunity to make a difference for individuals in the complaint process. So I think we have the opportunity to really have a much more fulfilling complaint process. Even if the outcome is not what the individual was hoping for, I still think that they could come away from it feeling heard. And I think that's a great opportunity.
Thank you. Right. Is there anything else that's come up before we, again, do our big reveal and lecture? At least that's what it feels like for me. No?
I'll just add one
please.
other opportunity that I had wanted to say, and I think it's the quality of the people on the commission. I think the people that, that I work with on the commission are, committed. They're thoughtful people. I think we have reasonable discussions. So it feels like a very functional group of really people whose heart is in this work. And that's a great thing. We couldn't do this without that.
Well, thank you. That's not always the case with every group of people, especially in this work. So because it is emotional work, it's yeah. So that is definitely an opportunity that you have. Anything else? Okay, so Cami, let's go to the big reveal and see what was it in our brilliance we thought. So again, a lot of these things came up all the time, but you brought them up. The moment we're in, this fierce urgency of now that, it's often attributed to Dr. King, but just that concept that we are here right now and we have to take action. Momentum for positive change. I also heard that. Community trauma. That's one of the things that I often, and we talk about as a challenge, but in a way, it's also an opportunity, because if there's community trauma, then you can do processes that help create healing. You can set up systems that are trauma informed. You can, as people have talked about, a complaint process that whatever the outcome helps the complainant to feel listened to and heard and validated, even if at the end of the day, the finding is not that what the person was asking for in a sense, but that process is very important. And so community trauma, which is not anything that we ever want, but exists basically in every community in different forms, is also an opportunity. Government support for oversight. People talked about that. We have 2 elected officials from the city council here in this training. That is not something that happens in every community, and that is important. The fact that the city is, I'm not going to state it probably exactly right, but that the city is bringing in people to help the community have a conversation about what does Burlington want out of public safety. Again, something many places would never do. So, some of the other things on here, calls for reform and defunding and abolition. People have talked about that going from being seen as a small set of voices to a broader call. So that's been happening here. Centering those most impacted. There's a lot of different ways to define what that means, and many people will have slightly different senses of who's most impacted. But I'm also hearing that passion for, it's not about we want to make sure that Burlington Police Department gets the Police Department of the Year award. It's that we want to make sure that people feel safe, that they feel cared for, that the negative experiences that have happened do not continue. Demonstrating legitimacy, I'd say that's sort of been a theme throughout our time together this evening, and it's very important because, as I've said, it's not always easy. I'm sorry, my phone is ringing. You probably can't hear it. Policies and procedures can be changed. So this is something that, again, from listening to what you've talked about, looking briefly at the policy online about the role of the police commission in complaints, it's not always easy, but you are in a position where you can work to make those changes, to advocate, to work with the police department, to use data, the voices of the community. And as people have said a number of times, that part of the community is also the police department. So just ensuring that as you do that work, you've got everybody at the table. But that is a real opportunity. Creating something sustainable, I've heard that over and over again. So kudos to you, because so often people are very focused on like, what are we going to do now? And how are we going to deal with this case? But to be thinking about your legacy. I mean, I asked you to think about it, but you clearly are already thinking about it. What's happening with the people who follow you in this work? Defining the work and the role of the police commission and the outcomes. Now, often in the work that Cami and I are engaged in and our other colleagues at NACOLE, these are people and committees forming a new oversight board. Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Yesterday, we were doing training in South Bend, Indiana. I mean, it's all over the country, here in New England as well. And but you're actually in a place where you have an existing commission. It sounds like there's a lot of things that you have the ability to do, and you're just working to figure out how to make it happen. So it is still an opportunity to define that role, what the work is that you see as important, and what are the outcomes that matter? What is it that you really want to see coming out of that? And then again, just like a broken record, engaging all stakeholders. It's a challenge and an opportunity. It's not always easy to figure out how to do it. I know someone spoke about the city's ability to community and public outreach. And I can tell you here in Cambridge, we are a well-resourced city. We have a fairly diverse city, lots of very smart people who've been here for multiple generations. And one of our biggest challenges is public engagement, so that we really hear from the whole community. It's not only the activists and the people that come to public comment and the people who are comfortable getting up and giving a 3-minute speech that they've worked on and have all written out, but that you really can hear from the whole community. And, so I say it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. I know here in Cambridge through the pandemic, we have been working constantly to figure out with these new Zoom tools and other things, how can we do things differently than having a public meeting where people show up and raise their hands and go up to the mic and speak? So it is a real opportunity. And we're in a moment where there are new tools and new ways to engage stakeholders. So I think, I just want to ask again, if there's anything else that are going through this list has lifted up for people before we move on to the next slide. Okay, I'm not seeing anything. So next, I'm gonna try probably make Cami talk on this next slide too. So next, we just wanted to talk briefly about Newark and New Orleans, and because in some ways, we're saying we do a lot of this with communities that are starting oversight, but these are two communities that have had oversight and faced real challenges and had to rethink their model. We could go on at great length, but thinking about New Orleans. So New Orleans, famously has a history of, we'll just say corruption and violence in policing. And the whole nation saw during Katrina some of the most horrific things that you could imagine in the midst of a horrific natural disaster. And so in New Orleans, there was an investigation by the Department of Justice. There was a consent decree where the federal government, the Department of Justice, and the court and the city made an agreement, a binding agreement, to affect specific changes and then to monitor those changes. And that process is still ongoing. There's still a federal monitor. And that work included the creation of the Office of the Independent Monitor. So NACOLE's current president, Susan Hudson, actually has just taken a leave from that work, but she has been the director of that office since it started. And it really had to change because this is kind of a long, detailed story, but it was under the control of the city's inspector general, who was basically a political figure, had no interest in civilian oversight, and pretty much kept them from doing anything. The community was not happy, and so people organized and actually got a referendum on the ballot to change the city charter, to take the office of the independent police monitor out of the inspector general's office in the city and to make it an independent office. And that won. And so really that combination of community activism, the history of New Orleans, again, a long, long history, we probably all have some idea, and the political situation. You would think with a federal consent decree and a federal monitor, what else would you need? But it turned out that in the specific context of New Orleans, that inspector general, who, again, the role of the inspector general is to be kind of independent oversight over the whole government. That particular inspector general was not interested in civilian oversight of the police, and the community and the people in that office worked together and made that change. And it's still a tough city, but New Orleans has made so much progress in policing. And it's not only because of the Office of the Independent Monitor or because of the federal consent decree, but those combinations of things and training on the role of trauma and a program that's focused specifically on teaching police officers to be to not be bystanders, but to be active and intervene when they see other officers making bad decisions or taking terrible actions. Those things have all worked together. So, but I would say that the point of the New Orleans piece is that it was a city that's had many challenges. You would think had a system that worked, but it wasn't working, and people made those changes. I'm sorry, Cammie, did you want to add anything about New Orleans? I'm going on and on.
I was just going to add, one of the other things I think is an important lesson from the New Orleans model and experience is that they have done an incredible amount of work there to gain the trust of the law enforcement agency. They do have, not only are they a place where law enforcement can come to make complaints, because there is a very long history of some horrible things happening to law enforcement in New Orleans when they become whistleblowers. And so creating a safe space for them to try and help make to do their part in making the law enforcement agency better, making sure that commendations as well as complaints were at the forefront in the reports, and just kind of being there to help. They're at a point where they have officers come and just kind of talk about stuff with them, to see how they might be able to make recommendations to do things better. And so that is an amazing place to have moved to. And it's taken a lot of work, but I love using that example because it shows that that's possible. So
yeah, well,
thanks
you
for letting me add that in.
Oh, please. No, thank you. And so let's turn to Newark, and maybe not for quite as long, but so Newark, New Jersey, they in 2016 created a civilian complaint review board. The history, which is long and detailed, but it really goes back to the rebellions, the so-called riots in 1967, I believe, in Newark, just like in my hometown, Detroit. And there have been calls for civilian oversight for decades, but really there was an effort by community activists in the ACLU, almost 10 years ago now, that led to the Department of Justice coming in, doing the same thing, doing an investigation about systemic civil rights violations, pattern and practice investigations, they call it. And they also worked with the city and came up with an agreement to reform the police department that included creating civilian oversight. So when they created their oversight, as soon as the ordinance was put into place, the state federation of police, the state police union sued, and there was an injunction. It was designed to be very powerful. And in some ways, I still think it's a bit of a cautionary tale. The ACLU, and I'll say I used to work at the ACLU, so I'm not anti-ACLU, but the ACLU really worked to try to create a model ordinance that was going to be the strongest in the country. And so immediately there was an injunction. Most of the ability of that office to do any work was taken away. The board could not. They could meet and they could get training and they could review policies, but they couldn't accept any complaints. They couldn't do anything that was even perceived as soliciting complaints. So even things like public forums to hear from the community, they couldn't do any of that. And it went through the courts for years. And in fact, there's still a little bit of that going on. But last year, there was a ruling that said most of those powers they got back. There was one very specific thing about being able to do concurrent investigations so that the police department would do an investigation and the oversight board would do an investigation at the same time. And there are reasons that could be good. There are reasons that's challenging, but they got their other powers back. And so they've now hired investigators. They're starting their work. But for about 4 years, it stalled out. and community members who felt like they were part of creating the best oversight in America, felt like everything was stuck and the system didn't work. And so they're having to do a lot of work to build legitimacy. And they've got the support of the mayor, Ross Baraka. They have now in New Jersey, there's been an effort to change state law to give civilian oversight boards more power, specifically in response to this lawsuit. And, it is moving forward, but it's been challenging. And for people who've been working on this for years, for decades, it can be frustrating. And yet progress is being made. And so again, Cami and I got to go down to Newark and do some training together a couple years ago. So she's also very familiar with Newark.
Right. We did the training when they couldn't do any work. It was very strange. And one of the things that was, I think, some takeaways is that, as any jurisdiction is looking to implement or enhance an existing oversight mechanism, doing it in a vacuum can be very dangerous. You can't always do it collaboratively because you might have stakeholders that don't agree with the changes that you feel are really important. But keeping everybody informed so that you also know what you might be up against is incredibly helpful, because that way, when you get to the end after you've done all this work, you aren't blindsided. And that doesn't mean they weren't providing updates, but they really got hit hard when the lawsuit came down. The other piece is because of all of that, they've had to spend a tremendous amount of time rebuilding momentum. So, the community worked really hard, and then the bottom dropped out, and everybody was like, well, look, one more thing that didn't work. And so they've had to really start from scratch with building the momentum, the trust, reestablishing some expectations, or I guess just establishing them now that they can actually tell everybody what they're doing. So it's just some great lessons learned, kind of a cautionary tale, but it is pretty exciting that they're up and running now. And we're rooting for them.
No, absolutely. So I guess we should probably, I see a question. Yep, Stephanie?
Yeah, just you use the term practice and pattern investigations. Can you explain what those are?
Oh, okay. So I always say I'm not an attorney. I know I worked at the ACLU, but I was the first organizer ever hired by the ACLU of Massachusetts. So I'm not a law guy. But basically, this is part of the United States Code, and it's a provision that allows the Department of Justice to come in and look at police departments, because it's in general the federal government doesn't have jurisdiction over local entities, right? So the federal government can't come in and say, hey, City of Burlington, you need to decrease your police budget by this or increase your fire budget. But because of this law, it's Section 1983, it allows them to specifically come in to look at law enforcement agencies to see if there's a pattern or a practice of civil rights violations. So it's really about constitutional violations. So when you hear people talk about consent decrees, and the Trump administration stopped them, and the Biden administration is starting them, those are legal agreements that are signed generally after there's an investigation, a pattern and practice investigation. And, we've been very lucky at NACOLE because a number of people who work as monitors, people who have helped lead those investigations. There's one person in particular, I think of Christy Lopez, who led the Ferguson, Missouri investigation. And so after that, the Obama administration left office, she ended up becoming a professor at Georgetown School of Law. And she has been doing amazing work in that context about building upon that and looking at what were the limitations in the work that she was able to do inside the Department of Justice and their Civil Rights Division, and try to, from the outside, sort of balance some of those things or enhance those abilities, and really thinking about what's the best way to make sustainable change. Are consent decrees really sufficient? How do they work? There's questions about funding. I mean, there's a lot of details I could go. I'm sorry. I'm going into way too much detail. I'm kind of a geek, I know. So, but basically, there are federal investigations by the Department of Justice looking at constitutional violations of civil rights in a systemic way, so that there's a pattern or practice. as opposed to there were some bad officers, or this, this one trainer at the training academy was giving people bad information. That this is something that is the way that department is working, and it's wrong, and it's illegal, and it's unconstitutional.
Great, thank you.
I'm happy to also, when I send the email with the other information that I'm sending you, send some links to some of those those investigations. So that not because, some of those investigations are really hard to read, the findings. Whether it's Baltimore or Seattle or New Orleans. And so there are so many things in there that absolutely are not applicable to Burlington. But it is interesting to see what they're looking at, like the categories of information and how they come to their determination. So it's almost like a study in what should I be looking for as far as systemic issues are concerned, maybe that aren't nearly as egregious as what might have been found in some of those other cities, but just to have more information about how to look at things and what things to look for.
Yeah, and I'll just add quickly that, and in all the investigations I've really read through, part of their whole process of doing an investigation was talking to people in the community and listening to their voices and capturing that and seeing that as part of the process. Because yes, it's a legal investigation, but it's also part of a process of making that community safer and making things better. So they have felt that it's important in those number of consent decrees to include, or those investigations, to include those voices and kind of put that on the printed page and put it on the record, so that the experience of people in that community is part of that. It's not just data and statistics, but it's people's actual lived experience. So. All right, so I'm watching the time. We've gone from thinking, oh, we've got so much time, but now we're getting closer to the end. So, should we try to go into this one, Cami, or should we skip this a little bit? What do you think?
I feel like they've talked through some of this.
Yeah.
As a result of the other conversations, I do like the next slide a lot, so I feel like we need to get to that one.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll just say quickly, I realize that we didn't change the wording because, we have sort of a template, but no, it's fine. It's, but, you're not exactly revising your ordinance, but you are looking to change the way you do things as a commission. So, but again, I think Cami's right. That's why I asked, because we've talked about this, what you hope to see in the future, expectations and success. Looks like you found us for support and guidance, but we'll connect you with more people. So yeah, I guess let's go on to that next slide, Cami. So this is going to be where it's a little less lecture again, and thinking strategically, right? So, people have a variety of backgrounds. Some of you may do strategic planning in your sleep. Some of you might be like, I don't even know what that means. But really think of this as just a brief time where we're going to talk about what is the intersection between, the systemic piece, these systems, data, the vision that you have for a Burlington where every single person feels safe and cared for and secure in various ways, and the creativity that you need to get there. It's not just there's no cookie cutter, there's no boilerplate. So as you think about this work of how you do this change, some of the things we've already talked about, like legitimacy, but there are many different things that really come into play as you think strategically around your work. Where do you already have legitimacy? Where are you lacking legitimacy? What are the reasons for it? I mean, again, I've heard some of that already, but continuing to think about that. And as you do your work, as things change, as you interact with people, as you hear from community members and the police department and others, always thinking about, where is that, how those things intersect? How is our look at the system intersecting with what we want to see, and new ways of thinking of things, new ways of doing things, being nimble and flexible when things aren't working, figure out how do we do it differently. And another couple of issues that are closely, or I kind of tie together are, oh, please, Stephanie. Oh, and I'm sorry, you're on mute.
Could you give us an example, like when you say, thinking about new ways of doing things? Just give us maybe some examples of other oversight groups, and just to kind of concretize that?
So I'm doing this off the top of my head, so it's going to be kind of almost a backwards example for many people. Cammie can probably think while I'm talking. She has one. But so my own civilian oversight board, in Cambridge, there's a long history. It goes back to 1984. And I've been doing this work for about 10, 11 years. I'm not sure anymore. But if you go back to the history, it was established, and still in the ordinance, was this kind of almost a very legalistic model. Someone would make a complaint. There would be a public hearing. The complainant would present their case, and they could have an attorney. The officer and the officer's attorney or the union rep, they would present their case, and there would be evidence. The board would ask questions, and then they would make a determination. And it ended up not working very well. And it's not to say that there aren't places that do that, and it works very well. But in Cambridge, it ended up making things very adversarial. And because police have specific rights called guarantee rights that are kind of an extension of the right against self-incrimination, but specifically in the context of their employment as people who can be ordered to do things. They don't have to say anything. They don't have to self-incriminate, and they have guarantee rights. So you would have these hearings where the police would basically kind of just, I don't have to be here. I don't have to tell you. I mean, you can make me show up. I'm not going to tell you anything. And it was very adversarial. And so it took a while, but what they eventually came up with, and it still has worked to this day, is actually having the police department do investigations. Because again, we're talking about a very low number of complaints in Cambridge at this point. But those investigations belong to the board. So I'm the director. I'm kind of the liaison in a sense between the board and the police department in certain ways. And so I will go in and meet with them. I check on the progress of investigations. I flag things that I think the board will ask questions about. And then we meet in executive session because of our state laws about personnel and complaints and things like that. And the people who've done the investigation, they come in, they present their findings, the board asks them questions. They may say, okay, thank you, we're going to deliberate, they're dismissed. They may say, okay, we want some more information. Were there witnesses? Why did you try to interview them? Why not? And it's actually been a good learning experience for the police department, because they have to now think not just about what does the police commissioner want in my investigation. They have to think about, what are the 5 members of the Cambridge Police Union Advisory Board going to be looking for? What questions are they going to ask? And so then they have to start anticipating and thinking differently. So that was a long example, but this was something that really came about because it was kind of dysfunctional. And in the end, by changing the rules, not the ordinance, they were able to create a system that has allowed more transparency internally. Our state laws don't allow that much transparency, although there's some changes coming. But it's really allowed members of the board to have a much deeper understanding of what the police do, how they're trained, what standards they're held to, and it gives them the ability to question it based on specific cases and specific examples.
Thanks, that was good.
All right, good, because I didn't know what I was going to say when you asked that question. So I think a couple other things I was about to say is like political capital and political will. So, political for some people sounds like it's politics or it's not good, but I always kind of think of politics in the small p sense. It's really how we come together as groups of human beings to figure out how we do things and take care of each other. We don't always do it that well. Sometimes we do it pretty well, but everything is political. NACOLE is political. I'm sure your police commission has politics. Everything is political. We know academia is political. I bet working in the bar is political. There's always politics, right? And so you have to think about, where's your political capital? And one day I'm going to come with a better word because I hate talking about capital, but where is your reservoir of goodwill, of trust, of belief? Maybe that's what I should start saying. And how do you, kind of keep track and be aware of how full that reservoir is and what's the state? Is it rising? Is it dropping? Is it clean? Is it contaminated? And then also the political will, right? So my sense is there's a lot of political will in Burlington for making change, but that's something that can change over time. Priorities change, individuals and roles change, needs of communities change. And always being aware of what the level of political will is. And then with both of those things, thinking about what's your role in maintaining and supporting it. I mean, it's, connected to legitimacy in that sense. But, how do you ensure that the work that you do, to the extent possible, is supporting that political will? That is, giving those people who are decision makers the sense that this is important and we know what's going on and we want more of it, we want to support it. Giving those people who are, sworn law enforcement officers the sense that, okay, these people might be watching us, but they've got good training, they want to do the right thing, and they're trying to make things better for everybody, including us as police officers. All of these different things are important. And I mean, that just brings me to this piece of thinking strategically around stakeholders. And I would say this is one of the more difficult pieces. I've probably said 2 or 3 times because I say it all the time, but it's very hard to maintain legitimacy with all of the stakeholders. I mean, I think police will tell you that they have a real tough time trying to maintain legitimacy with everyone they work with. And I actually think that it's even harder for oversight because we have to maintain legitimacy with the broad public, with different segments of the community, with individuals, with community organizations, with service providers, with elected officials, with appointed government officials, with staff, and with the police department, right? So it can be a big challenge. And so that is really that's really an area where you have to be constantly thinking, again, about this intersection. So as you're dealing with different sets of people, different sectors, and that if you're out in the community at a community meeting, they're listening to people and validating those voices and those experiences. There are probably also people who are listening who are thinking like, these people, they just hate the police. And you can't win everybody over, but you have to be aware and be thinking as you do your work and that you're trying to speak to multiple audiences at the same time. And it's not easy. And, there will be missteps, but as long as you're constantly thinking about how we're doing it, how does it affect where people are, how is it affected by kind of where people sit? People's roles in systems and in society play a part in how they experience things and how they think about things. Are people feeling attacked? Are people feeling supported? All of those things you have to constantly be thinking about. And it's, again, in that context of where are the systems, what's the vision that we have, and how do we creatively deal with those tensions? And then I think the last thing about thinking strategically for me is that if you're able to really stay in that strategic thinking space, it keeps you from falling into unhelpful binaries, we'll put it that way, us against them. Or, we're in a fight and someone's going to win. We're going to win or we're going to lose, so we got to win. There are the good people and the bad people. There are the victims and there are the perpetrators. I mean, there's so many binaries that I think that binary thinking is often when things start to break down, when it's hard to have communication, when people start to cross their arms and resist. And that's not what you're looking for. So, and it's not to say that there aren't times where there is right and wrong and there is good and bad, because there absolutely are. But not having that be the framework through which the work happens. So being open to good and bad while doing your best not to see everything as binary. Okay, so I've lectured for a long time, and I'm going to ask Cammie if she has anything she wants to add on this slide before we move on. And she's shaking her head. All right, so let's jump ahead to the next part of this. And I don't think they'll have much to say, so because we've talked about this a lot. Again, it's just in writing. How do you build on these opportunities that you all identified, some that we may have shared, while addressing and understanding the challenges, right? So that's like a concrete piece. So you've got that intersection of those 3 circles. So how do you do that? That involves strategic thinking. Again, I just went on and on. How do you build that legitimacy and with all the stakeholders and build goodwill for the future? Because again, that reservoir of trust, of goodwill, it can go up, it can go down, but you want to keep it as high as possible, because at some point there will be a critical incident, there will be a controversial situation, there will be people who, from whatever position, feel that your board, your commission has not done the right thing, and you want to the extent possible, build that sense of legitimacy before you get there, because then you can draw on that. I mean, this is not my brilliant thinking, right? We all know these concepts. Another thing, though, that I think is really important when you're thinking strategically is, what are your priorities and what can go on the back burner? You know, I haven't heard everything, but I get the sense that there's a lot that you want to do, which is great. And you're not going to be able to do it all. I mean, it'd be great if you can get staffing that's dedicated, that will help. But even if you have full-time staff, there will be things you want to do that you can't do. So, and that's kind of a constant process. You know, it's not a one and done. We figured out our priorities. There are 3 priorities. They'll be our priorities till the year 2047. You have to constantly be checking and thinking. And when we were talking about these places that have transformed their oversight model to some degree, that's what they had to do as well. And then the same thing, how can you adapt to conditions in order to achieve your mission? You know, you're in this place of kind of starting and creating this new version. I don't know if it's Police Commission 3.0 or 2.0, but to do that, you really have to be thinking about what's happening. How is it changing? You know, we thought this at a certain point in time, we went down this road, but now we see things are different. So how do you adapt and do that? How do you constantly be thinking where you need to go? And I don't know, I think I don't know if I have anything else to say about that one. Cammie, again, I know Cammie talks so much, so I try to give her a break.
I think you covered it, Brian.
Okay, great. So I think let's go to that next slide, and then we can do any final Q&A. So this is an image. Some of you may have seen this before. You may have seen the quote, which I'll just read. Nothing about us without us is for us. And this is really based on a slogan. It is a slogan that was popularized in South Africa by disability rights and youth activists. This is an image. This particular image is created by an artist named Ricardo Levins Morales. But I know, well, no, Cammie, you know, I'm going to make you talk. I want you to say why you love this image rather than me saying.
So I love this image. This image, the first time I saw it was actually in a presentation that a woman that I greatly admire put together on community engagement. Her name's Ursula Price, and she works, at the time, she was the deputy monitor in New Orleans. And she has this right above her desk to remind her every day of why, and she's doing the work, how she should do the work, and what happened, and that she needs to start thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow as well. And so it's just a nice and a beautiful reminder that we can sometimes get very caught up in what we believe needs to happen next, but also have to remember that it's not just about what we think is right, that there is something, it is about what is right for the community. And so I think it's particularly important reminder for those working in and around civilian oversight.
Yeah. Thank you.
So Cammie. I'm very excited that Brian has included it in his slide.
No, and I love including it. I mean, for those same, not so much because I saw it from Ursula, but just because of both the image, you know, Ricardo Levins Morales he used to be part of something called the Northland Collective that did these beautiful calendars every year out of Minnesota. And his sister actually used to live about 2 blocks from here. So it's kind of, there's a slight personal connection. But we have more on this slide that we want to bring up, which is a parallel piece. So this is a quote you may have heard before. If you have come to help me, you are wasting my time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And this is a slogan that is often attributed to a woman named Lilla Watson, who is an Aboriginal activist from Australia. But she will tell you, or she would tell you, that she didn't come up with this, that it was really, this was the way that community of activists in Queensland in the 70s talked, and this was their slogan. But I think it goes to such a deep truth, and not to be critical of things, because there are lots of good people who are working hard to help other people, and they see they're oppressed, and we're going to go help liberate them, and we're going to address our white privilege and our guilt and all that, and that's necessary, and it's absolutely insufficient. Transformation in society cannot happen unless all of us see that the struggle is a collective struggle, that none of us is free until all of us is free, that oppression dehumanizes everyone engaged in that interaction. And it's not to say that the oppressor is the same as the person who is experiencing oppression. Those experiences are not the same. But the common piece is that in that, both people lose a piece of their humanity. One, that piece of humanity is taken from them by the oppression, and the other, the act of oppressing someone actually diminishes your humanity. And so liberation is a joint project. We have to all be engaged, and we have to all see that this is not about someone else's life or just my life. This is about each and every one of us together. So we like to kind of end on this, because I think it's an important reminder that we're here, we're the ones doing the work. There have been those who've come before us, there will be those who come after us, there are those who accompany us, and there's a whole community that we are part of, that we're embedded in, that we are working to on behalf of, but in partnership with as well. So with that, I think we can go on to any next steps, questions, closing, right, Cami?
Yes.
So let's see, do we have any more slides? I guess not. Just our contact info, and people know that, right? So, yeah. So really, this is a chance for anything else. I see Stephanie's hand.
Yeah, I want to refer to your discussion around thinking strategically and helping us think about that. So when I sit here and think about that, it seems like one of the discussions that we should have at one of our public meetings, all of our meetings are public, so is what are our priorities? And, how do we think we ought to sequence the many things that we've learned from this? But I wonder if you have any other guidance around kind of thinking strategically and how to operationalize that. That would be helpful.
Yeah, well, let me start, and I'll ask Cami to add too, because Cami's been doing this work for a long time, has seen a lot of different communities. I think that part of it is actually taking the time. Now I have to admit that I didn't take the time to dive deeply into the work, but let's say that you're at the point down the road where you have staff, you're processing complaints, you're going into meetings monthly to review complaints and make determinations or something like that. That can be very time consuming, and it can be really challenging. This is one of the things I face with my own oversight board that I work with here in Cambridge, to also build in the time for ongoing training, for reflection, and for listening to the community. It's challenging. And so part of that is really just making sure you carve out the time to do strategic thinking along with those other things, that you really have time, almost like in a retreat format, to really do a deep dive. And again, I know every state is different. There's different laws about how you do that, what you could do, where you could do that. So whatever you need to do, but to really take time, maybe once a year, to stop and pause and reflect and look not at the work that's in front of us today and what do we have to get done by this 30-day deadline, but like, how has it been going? What have we been hearing? What are the things that, stepping back, we want to keep looking at? So it's really trying to build that time in. And I'll be honest, I think it's really challenging. I have really struggled with my own board to create that space because people are busy and we've got cases. And if we don't do that, it takes a toll.
I would just add to that, one of the things that I've seen with other boards that are looking to, who are looking to prioritize what comes next. a lot of times they do community surveys ahead of time. They do small facilitated discussions. One city, they were actually in the process of establishing oversight. So it's a different point in the process. But they brought together, they know who their community stakeholders are. They know that there are groups that are heard from often. They know that there are also groups who are representing members of the community that we don't hear from as often. They brought together those stakeholders. I don't think there were more than 10 people in any given meeting. They had, I think, a total of 10 meetings where they asked the same questions from each one of them to hear their thoughts on some of the work that would be done. And it was amazing to hear the collection of thoughts on the direction that oversight should take and the priorities that there should be. And having those small facilitated conversations, you could hear so much more than in a larger community meeting. Because there were lots of people that probably would never have gotten up in front of a large group and said what they said. They felt very comfortable and being very open and honest. And I should mention that the community surveys that they did kind of informed the questions. So it was a process of starting very big, narrowing it down. And then from that, then you have this ability to narrow it down even further as a commission with the things that, based on the feedback from the broader community, what are those things that we're going to narrow down to? So that's one suggestion I have for process that might be helpful as you move forward.
So, should we stop sharing the slide?
Sure. So I can actually see everyone. That would be lovely.
Yeah. So, yeah, but really, this is just, we have a few minutes left. So any other questions or thoughts or things that, that you're wondering how we might help you? And there don't have to be. Oh, please.
I don't want to just take the space from my other commissioners, so interrupt me whenever. But I want to ask you a question. It might seem out of left field, but one of the things that's happened recently is that there's been a discussion around staffing levels because the city council passed a motion to reduce the size of the police force by 30%. And so more recently, the chief has disseminated a staffing plan to explain how, various complaints or, issues would be policed and so forth. And I'm just wondering, I see a lot for us to do as a police commission. Is that something for us to weigh in on in your experience with others? Like, I've had reporters call me and ask me to comment on that, and I'm not sure that's my purview as a commissioner. So I'm just wondering, do you think that's the purview of commissioners to comment on the specifics of deployment of officers and staffing and so forth?
Yeah, so I would say, as someone who's not, I wish I'd read more. I'm not totally familiar with your model and the role of the commission as it is in the ordinance or in the charter. My general advice would be that as a member of the commission, generally the commission should speak with one voice, and it should be, it should be whatever the commission determines it is. Now, that doesn't mean that as an individual, you can't say, I'm speaking as someone who, as an individual, even though I'm on the commission. But the reality is people will often still hear that as, oh, well, the vice chair of the commission says blah, blah, blah. So it's a challenge in that way. But I would say that whatever your powers are, I think that it would seem to be, again, I can't promise, not an attorney, don't know the charter and the ordinance, but it would seem to me that would be within your purview as a commission to have that discussion, to, ask for the plan, to maybe even ask the chief to come in and speak to the commission and talk about it, ask questions, offer any suggestions. I think that worst case scenario, you make your suggestions and you don't really get much feedback, but I would hope that, especially if something that the body is doing in its official capacity, that there would be both support for that and interest in your perspective. And one of the things that I think is really great about civilian oversight is that over time, I've seen in my own city more and more over the years in many cities, police leaders and rank and file learn that it's actually really helpful to know what people who aren't police think. There's such a way in which policing culture gets very internally focused. And there are reasons for that. I mean, some are maybe not so great. Some are very reasonable and logical. And it's really important to hear from those outside of policing. And as a commission that is focused on this, that's getting training from civilian oversight practitioners, that's getting training from the law enforcement agency that you are working with, you have an extra measure of legitimacy because you actually have training. You're looking at these things. So it may be something over time you work up to, but it's a long-winded way of saying, I think looking at policies and proposals is a very important piece of the work. And as long as it doesn't come into conflict with some provision of your local ordinance or the city charter or any other agreements, it seems to me like that's a good thing to do. But to do it in a format that is, again, a meeting that is open, that people can really hear, and that you're working as a body. So that was very long. But Cammie, you want to?
Yeah, so the simple answer is there are commissions in police commissions throughout the country who do look at those things. They are mandated to, that they are involved in almost every little aspect of the process so that there is that feedback piece that Brian was just discussing. The policy that guides you, as we discussed before, is fairly vague on some of these things. And so it's a matter of kind of working to fill in the specifics because it's, if memory serves me correct, it does not specifically say that this is something you should or should not do. But there are many police commissions who do those things where they look at new policies, some look at budget recommendations, staffing recommendations. They also, some are responsible for saying, I think we need the police need to do an audit of X, Y, or Z. So there is a vast amount of authority that's out there. I think some of those, in that discussion of priorities, I think determining those authorities and solidifying them maybe should be as part of the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Helpful.
Other questions? Well,
I have other questions, but I know that we'll have some time with Cammie, and some of them were more specific types of questions that we would probably benefit from hearing about other oversight agencies' experience. Mm-hmm. So I'll save I'm noting them down, actually. I'm writing them as I go.
We both have our lists.
So that makes sense. And, and again, I mean, both through NACOLE and just also, I mean, I am in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I love Vermont. I know it's easy for people to say, but so, I would hope that I can continue to be engaged and support the work you're doing as well.
That's awesome. That would be great.
Yeah.
Well, if, I guess time for last questions if anybody has any. Well, like I said, for sound like a broken record, I cannot thank you guys enough for being here with us, taking this time to help us along through this. I mean, this is true. Like I've already said it before, this has been invaluable. And I think this is really going to help us be able to kind of like plot a path forward and see what's actually possible for us to get things accomplished. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's really a pleasure and honor to be able to work with you.
I'm looking forward to working with you as you move forward. So thank you.
Yeah,
for including us in this.
Thank you so much as well.
You're welcome. And thank you all for being so willing to get engaged and answer all those questions, have those discussions. Not everyone wants to, so I really appreciate that. I feel like I've gotten to at least know you a little bit. So thanks for everything.
Great.
Well, I guess with that, then we can make a motion to end this meeting. By Shireen, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, then. Everyone in the public that tuned in, thank you very much. Our next Police Commission meeting will be on the 22nd of June, this coming Tuesday. And that notice will be going out tomorrow. So we hope you tune in and show up. Everyone out there, thank you very much and have a great weekend. Happy Juneteenth.
Thank you all for coming. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Happy Juneteenth.
Yeah, thanks.